You've probably seen it already because practically the whole internet has. A tweet went viral claiming that Mafia the Old Country doesn't have swimming physics, just like the older Mafia games, and it spread like wildfire. That post alone has clocked up over 20 million views, and the follow-up video comparing it to Red Dead Redemption surged past another 20 million, not because of anything meaningful about the game itself, but because players are dunking on the idea that in 2025 you can't jump into water and go for a swim. But here's the thing. That's reductive nonsense. The absence of swimming isn't a bug or an oversight, it's a deliberate design choice carried over from the very first Mafia. For over 2 decades, falling into water has always meant fade to black and respawn. Some critics even pointed out that this consistency is part of the game's DNA, but good luck squeezing that kind of nuance into a meme. Instead, the conversation was hijacked by snark. Millions scrolling through Twitter came away with the impression that this game is defined by what it lacks, rather than the things it actually does exceptionally well. The atmosphere, the meticulous period detail, and a laser-focused campaign. PC Gamer's review summed it up neatly. You can laugh at the fade to black if you want, but the game never wavers in its confidence about what it is. And that's the real story. Mafia the Old Country was treated like a punchline when, in reality, it's one of the most impressive mid-budget releases we've had in years. A AA success story, if you will. So today we're going to cut through the noise, dig into the actual development story, and explain why this so-called controversy is little more than nitpicking dressed up as discourse. This is why Mafia the Old Country drama is absolutely pathetic.
Got a grenade! What?
The Mafia series has always been an odd one in gaming's crime family. Never as popular as Grand Theft Auto, yet always distinct enough to carve out its own niche. Gritty, period-accurate gangster dramas that leaned into atmosphere and story more than sheer chaos. The original 2002 release became a cult hit precisely because of that focus. As Eurogamer noted in hindsight, Mafia wasn't about playground mayhem, it was about immersing players in the mood of an era. The 2010 sequel doubled down on that identity, winning praise for its cinematic storytelling, even if it never tried to match GTA's vast scale. Then came Mafia 3 in 2016, the debut of Hangar 13. On paper, it looked like a breakout moment, a richly detailed New Orleans-inspired setting, a strong cast, and one of the best licensed soundtracks ever assembled. Unfortunately, the execution simply couldn't match the ambition. The game was bogged down by repetition, technical hiccups, and performance problems that overshadowed the story. It was a disappointment that left both the series and the studio on shaky ground. Compounding the issue, Hangar 13's own fortunes didn't improve. Multiple rounds of layoffs, scrapped prototypes, and the collapse of their ambitious project Vault painted a picture of a studio struggling for stability, and morale would hit rock bottom after yet another cancellation, with staff openly questioning whether the studio could survive at all. Hardly the backdrop you'd expect for producing a blockbuster that could stand toe-to-toe with Rockstar or CD Projekt. And that's the context for Mafia the Old Country. While many modern studios pump hundreds of billions of dollars into projects, desperately chasing triple prestige, a budget of a huge magnitude simply was not there for this title, yet something quite amazing happened. After years of turmoil, Hangar 13 is not in a position to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at another AAA gamble. They instead regrouped around a more modest vision, a smaller, mid-budget title that could deliver spectacle and atmosphere without the bloat. And crucially, by keeping things lean, Mafia the Old Country avoids the very traps so many modern gamers are sick to death of: bloated padding, endless battle passes, and the sort of monetization schemes that make you feel like you're clocking into a part-time job rather than playing a game. Instead of treating players like walking wallets, Hangar 13 went back to basics: craft, atmosphere, and a story worth caring about. And speaking of not being treated like a mug, why would you ever pay full price for live service AAA slop when you don't have to. Right now through my links, you can grab Mafia the Old Country at 24% off, Elden Ring Night Rain at 22% off, Expedition 33 for a staggering 43% off, Black Myth Wukong at 40% off, and Stellar Blade for 29% off, plus thousands more bargains. Don't waste your money on RRP when you could fill your library for a fraction of the price. Happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. The development of Mafia the Old Country was nothing short of a survivalist game design. Hangar 13 had been through wave after wave of layoffs, leaving them with a much smaller team than when they made Mafia 3. Bloomberg described the studio's condition as a revolving door of projects and cancellations, with morale suffering heavily as one ambitious idea after another collapsed. To put it into perspective, Mafia 3 had a staff of over 200 developers, while The Old Country was built by fewer than 100. Resources were stretched thin, and the team had to face an awkward truth: they simply couldn't afford to keep chasing the AAA dragon anymore. That's why they pivoted to Unreal Engine 5. It was both a lifeline and a headache. On one hand, it gave them access to cutting-edge tools, lighting, environments, and workflows that could make a mid-budget project look far more expensive than it was. On the other hand, it forced the team to start fresh, relearning pipelines and wrestling with a steep learning curve. Developers later admitted the process was chaotic, like building the plane while flying it. But for a downsized studio, it was the only way to punch above their weight. Crucially, Hangar 13 didn't waste energy trying to mimic Rockstar with a bloated map full of distractions. Instead, they played to their strengths. The design philosophy was clear: cinematic set pieces, richly detailed period settings, and story-first design. From the cobblestone streets to the vintage automobiles, from tailored suits to a soundtrack dripping with atmosphere, everything was calibrated to deliver that old-world gangster drama the franchise is known for. Games Radar praised this approach, noting that the game may not be the biggest of the year, but it is one of the most confident in knowing what it wants to be. It's a back-to-basics philosophy that worked. No fishing mini-games, no crafting systems, and certainly no underwater combat gimmicks. Just a razor-sharp focus on what matters: atmosphere, immersion, and narrative. In short, Hangar 13 stopped chasing other people's strengths and doubled down on their own, which is so refreshing to see in the modern gaming landscape. But there are more reasons to respect this game beyond the fact that it's fat-free and streamlined. While you can get the game even cheaper now by using my affiliate link, when Mafia the Old Country launched, it was priced at $49.99, sending a clear message to consumers. This wasn't another $70 behemoth stuffed with nonsense. It's a back-to-basics, straight-to-the-point title. It's a tightly wound single-player experience, the kind of game you can actually finish in a week without needing to hand in your notice. Perfect for grown-ups or anyone who has things to do in their lives besides committing hundreds of hours to gaming in a week. The runtime sits at around 10 to 13 hours in total, and that was entirely deliberate. This isn't some half-empty sandbox masquerading as value. It's a focused narrative with a clean beginning, middle, and end. The sort of title that, in my opinion, should be much more common when we consider how time-poor the majority of people actually are. Games Radar praised this restraint, saying that every mission feels crafted rather than stretched, while the gamer added that the restraint on display here is refreshing in a market obsessed with size over substance. In other words, you're not spending half the campaign driving across a map to collect feathers or opening another checklist of busy work. Compare that to what $70 buys you elsewhere: bloated content designed to look good on the back of the box, but which most players abandon long before the credits roll. And it's not just critics saying this. Steam reviews are filled with relief at a game that actually fits into modern adult lives. One summed it up perfectly: "This is the first game in years I've actually finished. Shorter was better." That's the kind of feedback Ubisoft or EA would kill for, but can never get because they're too busy selling you grind. And that contrast is the real indictment of today's AAA industry. For years, publishers like Activision have been trapped in an arms race of size over sense, building bigger maps, stuffing them with more filler, and then slapping on microtransactions to squeeze every last drop from their audience. They've convinced themselves that bloat equals value, when in reality, most players walk away quietly halfway through, bored stiff by the nonsense. It's a design philosophy that treats your time as disposable and your wallet as the end game. However, Mafia: The Old Country is the opposite sort of title, and that's the genius of Hangar 13's decision. In an era where publishers are constantly testing how far they can push before players break, Mafia: The Old Country quietly went the other way, offering something affordable, polished and respectful of your time. It may not be a 100-hour epic, but at least it respects the fact that most of us don't have 100 hours to waste on the likes of Dragon Age, the bloody Valguard, nor would we want to. Overall, the corporate gaming access media landscape has been predictably split down the middle on this one. Critics circled around the usual suspects, animations not being as fluid as Red Dead Redemption 2, NPCs feeling limited, and that ever-present phrase, truncated AAA, cropping up in reviews. IGN, for instance, called it a solid but unspectacular entry that feels restrained by its budget, which is really just a backhanded way of saying they expected Rockstar with half the staff. Polygon echoed the same line of thought, describing it as a game that constantly hints at something grander but wisely pulls back to focus on what it can actually deliver. Players, however, saw it very differently. Steam reviews leaned strongly positive, praising the atmosphere, the meticulous period detail, and, crucially, the fact that it respected their time. One user summed it up bluntly: shorter, cheaper, better. I'll take this over another 100-hour Ubisoft collectathon any day. Another popular review with hundreds of upvotes read, "This feels like a throwback to when single-player games had confidence, no fluff, no padding, just story and style." That kind of sentiment spread across forums and social media, where players expressed genuine relief that the studio had the guts to deliver something focused and complete, rather than bloated and exhausting. And the sales speak for themselves. Mafia: The Old Country shifted over 800,000 copies in just its first 5 days. Not GTA numbers, but a huge success for a project that deliberately set out to be smaller in scope. As PC Gamer noted, in today's brutal market, those numbers would be a dream for many bigger studios. So, while the critics nitpicked, the audience voted with their wallets. People do want games like this, and Hangar 13 proved it. And that's what makes the whole discourse around not being able to swim in this game so ridiculous. A game that deliberately set out to be a tight, atmospheric, story-driven experience got dogpiled online simply because you can't doggy paddle across a river. Never mind the atmosphere, the detail, or the fact that Hangar 13 clawed this thing into existence after years of chaos. No! The internet decided it was open season because the water fades to black. If that's what passes for serious critique in 2025, then standards have well and truly collapsed. It's even more absurd when you remember that some of the most beloved games of all time had the exact same limitation. The original Mafia handled water this way, the early Grand Theft Auto titles handled water this way, even plenty of classic platformers couldn't be bothered with swimming physics, and nobody was screaming that it ruined the game. Yet now, in an era where social media thrives on easy dunking, a design choice rooted in the series' DNA becomes the whole conversation. The real irony is that some of the very same people who moan non-stop about bloated AAA games, endless checklists, and wasted hours are now the ones clutching their pearls because a lean, story-driven game doesn't waste time on underwater combat. Mafia: The Old Country isn't missing something, it's refusing to bloat itself with nonsense, and that's exactly why it deserves credit. Thankfully, not everyone has been buying into the pile-on. Developers themselves weighed in, with a Larian Studios developer pointing out that it's unrealistic to expect every AA release to mimic Rockstar's obsessive detail, and that what Hangar 13 achieved with their resources was more than commendable. Others across the industry echoed the same sentiment. If players genuinely want smaller, more affordable games to exist, they need to stop demanding billion-dollar production values from studios that don't have billion-dollar budgets. And that's the crux of it. These so-called controversies aren't evidence of failure. They're symptoms of the industry's warped expectations. Mafia: The Old Country isn't trying to be Red Dead Redemption 2. It's trying to be a focused, stylish gangster drama. And in that, it succeeds. This is where Mafia: The Old Country becomes more than just another sequel in a long-running series. It's a case study in why the AA space isn't just important, it's essential to the survival of the games industry. For years, publishers have been in a dick measuring contest where every new release needs to be bigger, longer and more expensive than the last. Budgets now balloon into the hundreds of millions, teams sprawl into the thousands, and yet the end result is often the same bloated, risk-averse blockbuster you've played a dozen times before. Mafia: The Old Country proves there's another way, a mid-budget, tightly scoped, story-driven game that still looks great, still plays well, and crucially doesn't demand you sacrifice your free time just to see the credits. Nearly 1 million sales in its opening week show there is a genuine appetite for this kind of experience. Players do want shorter, sharper, cheaper games that still deliver quality. Mafia: The Old Country demonstrates that with the right focus and smart use of technology, you can deliver something memorable without spending stupid money. In many ways, it isn't just a win for Hangar 13, it's proof that the middle class of gaming is alive, and it might just be the future. So, when all is said and done, Mafia: The Old Country isn't the punchline the internet's tried to turn it into. The lack of swimming physics doesn't make it a bad game, it makes it faithful to its roots. The slightly stiff NPC animations don't erase the atmosphere, the story or the sheer craft that went into squeezing this much out of mid-budget project. What this game proves is simple. Fun and polish matter far more than whether or not your character can doggy paddle across a river, and in an industry choking itself with impossible budgets and endless layoffs, that's not just a reminder, it's a lifeline. AA isn't a failure. AA is survival, and if players genuinely want games that aren't bloated with microtransactions or padded to breaking point, then this is what they need to support. The game is living proof that it's not really the size that counts, it's how you use it, the motion of the ocean. So many of you watching at home will be pleased to know that sometimes smaller really is better. And if the success of Mafia: The Old Country tells us anything, it's that the future of gaming might just lie in studios brave enough to embrace that truth. Because at the end of the day, it's the motion of the joystick, not the length of the campaign. Also, don't forget that through my links, you can grab Mafia: The Old Country for 24% off, Elden Ring Night Reign at 22% off, Expedition 33 for a ridiculous 43% off, Black Myth Wukong at 40% off, and Stellar Blade for 29% off, plus thousands more deals waiting to be picked clean. Don't line the pockets of publishers charging 70 quid for grind for your library for a fraction of the cost instead. Click the links, bag a bargain, and if you want to support what I do in a more personal way and access my behind the scenes cosplay library and more over on Patreon, I look forward to speaking to you over there soon.